Most women would have just given her a card, maybe a pair of earrings or some tidy envelope with cash, but not Margaret. Margaret gave her granddaughter a car, not a Tesla, not even a shiny used Honda. It was a battered beige 1998 Toyota Corolla, sun-faded on the roof, with a sagging seatbelt and an analog radio that only played static. Her daughter-in-law Clarissa had laughed, not behind closed doors, but in front of the whole family. "Oh, Margaret," she said, sipping from her glass of organic Cabernet, "you've officially entered your antique phase." Margaret smiled, a thin, polite curve of the lips, the kind of smile that kept her from snapping like she wanted to. Because deep down she remembered exactly what Clarissa had done, the lies, the poison drip of guilt she fed Margaret's son for years, the way she twisted motherhood into a game of performance and status and turned Margaret into the villain simply for being ordinary. Margaret had learned to stay quiet, to observe, to wait. But now her granddaughter Lila had turned 18, and with it came a subtle shift, a new chapter. The girl was finally old enough to see through things, or so Margaret hoped. When Lila opened the garage door and saw the Corolla, her face twitched with confusion. Her pink-glossed lips pressed into a line. "Oh," she said cautiously, "is this for me?" "It is," Margaret said. "It's old, but it runs." Clarissa was already recording on her phone. "Say thank you, Lila, for the junkyard treasure." Margaret didn't flinch. She reached into her cardigan pocket and handed Lila a single brass key. "You should open the trunk," she said. "There's something inside." Lila hesitated. The moment stretched thick with unspoken tension. Then she walked around to the back, the gravel crunching under her sandals, and turned the key. The trunk creaked open, and then silence. No one spoke. Lila stared inside her hand over her mouth. Her breath caught. Then a sharp inhale. Her eyes shimmered and tears spilled over unchecked and sudden. Because inside the trunk wasn't junk. It was a carefully arranged archive of her childhood, her lost stuffed bunny, the one she cried over for weeks when she was 5. A music box that played the lullaby Margaret used to hum when rocking her to sleep. Handmade birthday cards, drawings Lila had made in crayon, kept in pristine condition. Photos from every milestone. A pressed flower from the bouquet at her first dance recital. Even the faded ballet slippers she thought had been thrown away. Grandma Lila whispered, voice trembling, "How did you keep all this?" Margaret stepped forward, her hands folded. "You don't remember, but this was my car when I used to drive you to school, to the park, to doctor's appointments when your mom was too busy. Every time you left something behind, I kept it. I knew one day you'd want to remember who you were before the world told you who to be." Clarissa laughed again, though it cracked slightly. "It's just sentimental junk. Kids don't care about that." But Lila didn't move. She was still crying, but differently now, not from pain, from recognition, from something deeper. And maybe you've been there. Maybe you've watched someone dismiss what matters most to you. Maybe you've stood at the edge of being forgotten, your quiet love mistaken for irrelevance. So tell me, what would you do? Would you fight? Or would you, like Margaret, wait until the silence spoke louder than the screams? Because here's the thing they never tell you. The deepest power isn't in revenge. It's in remembering. Margaret didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She had given a gift only a child raised in shadows could understand. A map back to herself. Clarissa was still scoffing, but the sound was distant now. Lila had turned away from her, climbing into the driver's seat of the Corolla, holding the music box like a fragile relic. She turned the key in the ignition. The engine rumbled to life. Margaret watched from the porch, hands still folded. Her smile wasn't tight anymore. It was calm. You see, most people think power is loud, but it's not. Sometimes it's a worn car that runs without complaint. Sometimes it's in what we choose to keep and who we give it back to when the time is right. Lila looked back at her grandmother with eyes that finally saw her. Not as the old woman in the background, but as the quiet architect of everything that had ever felt like home. The Corolla rolled down the driveway with a gravelly purr, its rusted frame glowing gold in the setting sun, like an artifact, not an embarrassment. Clarissa's voice trailed off mid-complaint, her jaw set, the laughter gone. The phone in her hand dropped slowly to her side, forgotten. Margaret didn't say another word. She didn't have to. Inside the car, Lila drove in silence. One hand on the wheel, the other on the music box in her lap. The tune had stopped, but it echoed inside her, haunting and warm. Something primal stirred a memory of being small of arms that held her without agenda. Not perfect, but honest, real. Have you ever had that moment when the truth strikes you, not like lightning, but like a quiet thud deep in your chest? A recognition so old and raw it hurts. That was Lila now. She wasn't just crying because she was moved. She was grieving what she hadn't known she was missing. She drove around the block twice, blinking back tears, her hands shaking on the steering wheel. The air inside the Corolla still smelled faintly of lavender, her grandmother's perfume. The same scent that had lingered on her pillow after weekend sleepovers. It clung to the upholstery like a secret. When she pulled back up, Clarissa was gone back inside the house, likely texting her curated circle of wine moms and Pilates friends. Lila parked and walked up the steps. Margaret was still sitting in the rocker as if she hadn't moved at all. "I didn't know you saved all that," Lila said quietly, her voice husky. "You weren't supposed to know, not yet. Why now?" Margaret's eyes softened. "Because now you can decide what to do with it. With all of it. The memories, the love, the pain, they're yours." Lila knelt in front of her, hands on her knees. "I don't think Mom liked it." "No," Margaret said gently. "She wouldn't. That car doesn't fit her narrative. It's not shiny enough." Lila gave a small, brittle laugh. "I used to think she had it all figured out. Perfect job, perfect makeup, perfect rules. Perfection is a disguise people wear when they're terrified to be seen." Lila sat back on the porch step. The sky was fading to violet. A breeze passed between them, laced with the scent of honeysuckle and something older like memory itself. "Mom said you were manipulative, that you tried to control Dad, that you pit them against each other." Ah, there it was. The myth. The carefully constructed story Clarissa had told and retold until even Margaret's own son had believed it. The one that turned a tired woman into a puppet master, a lonely grandmother into a schemer. Margaret didn't react. Her face remained calm. She needed someone to blame when your father started asking questions. "I was convenient." "Did you try to interfere?" "I tried to protect. That's not the same." Lila nodded slowly, but her brows furrowed. "Why didn't you ever say anything back? Defend yourself." Margaret looked at her with a sad kind of grace. "Because if someone needs to lie about me to sleep at night, I let them. I'd rather live with their stories than become like them." That silence again. "Do you feel it now? The tightening in your chest, the slow unraveling of everything you thought was safe and simple. It's terrifying, isn't it? Realizing the people who raised you might have been protecting themselves more than they were protecting you. That the truth you swallowed as a child was flavored by someone else's fear." Lila's hands were balled into fists in her lap. Why did Dad never say anything? Margaret turned her gaze to the darkening street. "Because he stopped knowing what was real." Clarissa is very good at shaping the world around her. She fills in all the spaces with her own colors. After a while, people forget what it looked like before. "But I remember," Lila whispered. "I remember weekends here, pancakes and puzzles. You never made me feel like I had to perform." Margaret smiled again, a little sad but proud, too. "That's what I wanted you to have, a place without mirrors." There was something in that sentence, "a place without mirrors," that hit Lila like a wave. She realized suddenly how much of her life had been spent performing, for approval, for love, for a mother who measured value by achievement and presence by productivity. But here was someone who had simply watched her, kept the pieces of her that others had tossed aside, made a sanctuary of forgotten things, and now handed it all back. Maybe you've never had someone do that for you. Maybe no one ever saved your childhood from the fire. But if they did, if even one person kept a piece of you alive, then you know how sacred that is. Lila reached out, took Margaret's wrinkled hand and held it tightly. "I'm sorry it took me this long to see you." Margaret's voice was a whisper. "You're here now. That's what matters." From inside the house, Clarissa's voice rose in irritation. Something about the Wi-Fi, about the casserole burning. But out here on the porch in the dim gold of twilight, none of that mattered. Two women sat, one old, one young, each holding the broken pieces of a story that had finally begun to make sense. The next morning, Margaret awoke to silence, the heavy, watchful kind. The kind that follows a storm but before anyone dares speak of what's changed. Clarissa had left early. Lila said she was meeting friends at some overpriced brunch spot, the kind with minimalist menus and servers who corrected your pronunciation. She didn't say goodbye to Margaret, not even a wave. But Margaret didn't mind. People like Clarissa always mistake absence for punishment. They think withdrawal is power. But some disappearances are gifts and exhale after years of holding breath. Lila stayed behind. She wore no makeup that day, No tight smile, just a loose sweater, jeans, and a look that said, "I'm ready now. Show me everything." Margaret brewed coffee, none of that pod nonsense, and poured it into mismatched mugs. Lila took hers without cream, without fuss. The two sat at the small circular kitchen table, and for a moment neither spoke. Then Lila broke the silence. "What was she like before she married Dad?" Margaret blinked. The question was sharp but not cruel. It came from curiosity, not accusation. "She was clever," Margaret said slowly. "Determined. The kind of woman who always found the angle. She made people feel important, needed, especially men. Especially." Lila nodded like she'd guessed as much. Margaret continued, eyes drifting to the window where morning light filtered through the ivy-covered fence. But she didn't like questions, or uncertainty, or anyone she couldn't manage. "And your father?" She paused, voice tightening. "He wanted so badly to be good enough for her." "He always seemed tired," Lila said softly. "Yes. He spent years trying to meet her changing standards. She moved the goalposts constantly. One day it was ambition, the next sensitivity. He was always half wrong." Lila's hand curled around her mug. "She made me feel like that too, like I had to earn my space. And there it was, the pattern laid bare, passed down like some bitter heirloom. Have you ever felt that way? That no matter how you shaped yourself, it was never quite right? That love came with silent conditions wrapped in smiles but measured in sacrifice? It's a wound that doesn't always bleed. Sometimes it just pulses quietly, reminding you every day that you're only as safe as your performance." Margaret reached across the table and gently touched Lila's hand. "That's not your fault. You were born into someone else's shadow, but you don't have to stay there." Lila blinked fast like she was holding back tears. "She used to tell me you were jealous of her, that you wanted to be her." Margaret almost laughed. But it wasn't cruel, it was disbelief laced with deep sadness. If that's what she needed to believe to feel safe, I let her. But darling, I never wanted her life. I wanted peace. She wanted power. She told me you never helped, that she raised me alone. Oh, Margaret murmured, how easy it is to erase someone who never made noise. Lila stood then suddenly restless. She paced the kitchen, like her thoughts were clawing at her skin. How did Dad let it happen? How did he let her rewrite everything? Margaret sighed, because to confront her would have meant admitting how much of himself he lost. People don't like facing mirrors that show them their emptiness. Lila turned her face twisted in pain. He just disappeared into her. "He didn't disappear," Margaret said quietly. "He faded, bit by bit, until all that was left was compliance." And isn't that the real tragedy? When people don't vanish in one violent moment, but dissolve slowly, unnoticeably beneath the weight of someone else's need to dominate. Lila sat down again, this time closer. "I want to know everything she said, the truth, all of it. I don't want her version anymore." Margaret smiled, not triumphant, but tender. "Then we start with the boxes in the attic. There's more than just stuffed animals and ballet shoes up there." Together they climbed the narrow staircase, the wood creaking under their steps like it hadn't been visited in years. Margaret unlocked the door and swung it open. The scent of dust and cedar filled the air. And inside, not chaos, not junk, but order. Neatly labeled boxes, albums, letters, diaries, evidence. Not of guilt, but of care. Margaret had kept everything. Report cards, drawings, birthday invitations, notes from Lila's father during college, photos from their early marriage ones Clarissa never showed. "I wasn't hoarding," Margaret said softly. "I was archiving what they tried to bury." Lila moved through the boxes slowly, reverently. Each piece peeled back a layer of distortion. With every letter, every photo, her sense of self reshaped. A puzzle undone, and now rebuilt not by force but by clarity. Have you ever been handed the truth so delicately it made you weep, not from pain, but relief? That was Lila now. Margaret sat on an old rocking chair in the corner, watching her granddaughter reclaim her story. And in that attic, dim, quiet, holy, a new kind of inheritance took root. Not money, not jewelry, not even the car, but something far rarer. Identity. They spent hours in that attic. The light from the small window shifted as the sun crawled across the sky, casting long beams over boxes labeled in Margaret's careful handwriting. Lila, age 4, Adam and Clarissa, 2002. Letters, unsent. Each was a thread, and Lila followed them like a trail through a dense, tangled forest. By the time evening fell, her hair was dusted with cobwebs, her sweater smudged with the past and her soul aching. Some truths weren't easy to hold. She found a letter her father had written to Margaret but never mailed. The handwriting was rushed, bleeding with regret. "I'm sorry for how I spoke to you that day. Clarissa said you were meddling again. I wanted to believe her. It was easier than facing how wrong things felt. Sometimes I wonder what kind of man I've become. Leela's fingers trembled as she read it aloud. She didn't cry, not this time. The grief had moved from her throat to her spine, anchoring itself into something heavier resolve. Margaret watched her granddaughter unfold. You see, trauma isn't always loud. Sometimes it's folded into the corners of silence, into the moments you tell yourself, maybe I'm just overreacting, into the years you let someone else's version of you become your truth. But not Lila, not anymore. They sat on the floor beside each other now, an old quilt wrapped around their shoulders. Outside, the sky dimmed to navy, and downstairs the world Clarissa had built was beginning to crack just a little. Because when Lila didn't come down to eat, Clarissa texted. Then she called. Lila didn't answer. She was busy remembering herself. You kept everything Lila said again, almost in disbelief. Margaret nodded. Because they kept taking pieces of you away. Someone had to keep them safe. Lila looked down at her lap, where a small paper crown sat, the kind you get from a party cracker. It had her name written on it in glitter pen. I don't think I ever really saw you. No, Margaret said gently. But that's all right. I wasn't ready to be seen either. Not until now. You may wonder, why would a woman like Margaret stay quiet for so long? Why not fight? Confront, tear down the lies. But some women know that time has sharper teeth than rage. That patience, when wielded with love, can dismantle even the most ironclad illusions. And now, as the air chilled and Clarissa's footsteps tapped across the floor below, rising in pitch, the illusion was fracturing. Clarissa flung the attic door open without knocking, her voice sharp and demanding. There you are. I've been calling for an hour. What are you doing? Going through old junk, really. Lila didn't rise. She looked at her mother with a gaze that no longer wavered. It's not junk, Clarissa scoffed. Don't be dramatic. You're being manipulated. She always does this, makes herself the victim, plays the martyr. That's how she got your father, too. But her words no longer landed like daggers. They dropped hollow and limp, because Lila had seen the letters, the photos, the evidence, the pattern. She wasn't confused anymore. She stood slowly, the crown still in her hand. You don't get to tell me what's real anymore. Clarissa blinked, thrown off by the calm. You don't know the whole story, she said, grasping for control. No, Leela said, but I know enough now to question yours. Margaret didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence was the echo chamber in which Clarissa's control unraveled. Clarissa stepped forward. You're my daughter. I'm also a person, Lila said, one who deserves to know the truth, the whole truth, even the messy parts. And that was the crack that split the foundation. Because when a daughter stops performing, a mother who builds her identity on dominance begins to crumble. Clarissa's face hardened. You're being ungrateful. But Margaret, still seated, spoke at last. Her voice was quiet but firm. Gratitude that's demanded isn't love, it's currency. Clarissa's lips parted and then shut. She turned and stormed out the stairs, groaning beneath her sharp steps. The door slammed moments later, not just to the attic, but perhaps to a version of her life that no longer worked. Lila didn't chase her. She sat back down beside Margaret, the crown now perched lightly on her head, a crooked symbol of something deeper than royalty. She smiled through tears that felt terrifying and freeing. Margaret touched her cheek. It always does. That's how you know it's truth. Have you ever faced someone who's shaped your identity and chosen finally to stop letting them define you? It's not anger that does it, not revenge. It's clarity. And Lila finally mercifully was clear. They descended from the attic quietly, like survivors from a storm. The Corolla waited in the driveway, steadfast and simple. And Lila, looking at it now, didn't see rust. She saw roots. The house was quiet that night. Clarissa didn't come home. She sent a single text, short and cold, staying at Sarah's. Think about what you're doing. But Lila didn't respond. She read the message, stared at it for a long time, then deleted it. Not out of spite, but finality. Like closing the lid of a book she'd outgrown. Downstairs, Margaret was folding linens in the laundry room, humming softly, the same tune from the music box. The repetition of it was grounding like a tether in a world that had finally stopped spinning. Lila joined her folding pillowcases without being asked. They worked in silence, not because there was nothing left to say, but because some truths had already been said, and the rest didn't need words. But then Lila broke the stillness. Do you think she'll ever change? Margaret kept folding. Change is a choice. And Clarissa only changes costumes, not character. Lila winced at the truth of it, but she nodded. She always made me feel like I was never enough unless I was winning something, or impressing someone. Margaret placed the last sheet on the stack and looked at her squarely. That's not love. That's control dressed up as love. Lila leaned back against the dryer, arms folded. She told me my softness was weakness, that crying meant I wasn't resilient. She lied, Margaret said simply. Softness is where all real strength begins. Your mother wears armor because she doesn't know how to bleed without it. Lila's throat tightened. Do you think she ever loved me? Margaret walked over and cupped her granddaughter's face with both hands. Her palms were warm, lined with age and grace. She loved what you represented, not who you were. And maybe that was the cruelest truth of all. Because some people don't know how to love without possession. They don't know how to hold without crushing. Their love becomes a mirror, and the moment you reflect something they don't like, they shatter you. But Lila was done being a reflection. She was becoming a flame. Later, when the dishes were clean and the house dimmed, she walked out to the garage. The Corolla sat there like an old sentinel, quiet, unassuming, indestructible. She opened the trunk again slowly, reverently. The air inside smelled like paper and lavender. Her fingers brushed against the old ballet slippers, the crayon drawings, the worn-out bunny. And tucked in the corner, something she hadn't noticed before. An envelope. She picked it up. Her name was written in Margaret's handwriting, but older, faded, maybe written years ago. Inside was a letter. My sweet Lila. If you're reading this, then the world has already turned on its head. I've imagined this moment more times than I can count, but now that it's real, I pray one thing, that you've begun to remember who you really are. You were born into a family that spins illusions. But you were always the truth. I saw it in your eyes when you were still too young to speak. That hunger for something real. That fire they tried to dim with perfection and pressure. I stayed silent because I knew one day you'd ask the right questions. And when you did, I wanted you to have answers. Not from bitterness, but from love. There will come a moment when everything feels broken. When the people you trusted feel like strangers. When your mother's voice feels louder than your own. In that moment, I hope you find this. And I hope you know you are not broken. You are beginning. Drive this car like it's a chariot. It carried your laughter, your tears, your tiny shoes, and your spilled juice boxes. It remembers the version of you that never needed to prove a damn thing to anyone. Become her again. Love, Grandma. Lila folded the letter slowly, pressing it to her chest. Her whole body shook, not with sadness, but with release. That letter wasn't just a gift. It was a roadmap out of generational grief. She climbed into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine purred like a cat. The cassette player coughed to life, and Margaret's favorite old song started playing, gravelly warbled reel. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she was going alone. She drove through the night, the windows down, the wind in her hair. The stars wheeled overhead like silent witnesses. For the first time in years, she wasn't running from anything. She was running toward herself. And you... Yes, you reading this, maybe you've got a Corolla too, or a dusty letter, or a voice inside that's quieter than the rest but somehow feels truer. Listen to it, because there's something holy in remembering who you were before someone else told you who to be. Back at the house, Margaret stood on the porch watching the taillights fade. She didn't wave. She didn't cry. She just stood there with that quiet smile, the kind only a woman who waited decades for justice can wear, because she knew. The woman who knows her worth doesn't beg, she watches. Then she rises.